My name is Steve Hinks.
And this is the story about your daughter.
My daughter Lucy.
Lucy, okay, do you want to go ahead and talk about what happened to her?
Yes, when she was a little baby, she had an adverse reaction to the HPV vaccine, where she had a swollen arm and leg. Can't recall whether the vaccine was in the arm or leg, but it is on her medical records. Then, still a baby, she had an adverse reaction to her first MMR vaccine, where immediately afterwards she had a full dose of measles for the following week. About 10 days after that, we rushed to the doctors with suspect meningitis, and we were rushed straight into an isolation ward overnight. But that didn't develop. It only lasted a couple of days. But she did have a very enlarged lymph node come up the size of a golf ball, just in her neck, under her chin, which persisted for 9 months. My wife had worked as the secretary to the ear, nose and throat surgeon at the hospital and was aware of a number of cancers in young children, and asked if he could do a biopsy to her old boss. He said it was a simple 20-minute procedure, and we waited for the 20 minutes, and it was 2 hours. There was another lymph node underneath it he removed. She recovered reasonably well after that, and in fact, within 1 or 2 days, she could talk, because at that time the lump had been holding back her speech. So that was about 9 months after the vaccine. And after that, her health was reasonably good. There was an occasion she went to the doctors and was sent to a consultant when she was about 7 or 8 years of age. She didn't miss school, but she had abdominal pains that persisted. The consultant said he thought it was abdominal migraine, but didn't tell us any more than that, thought it would go away. And it did go away. But what he actually wrote to the GP, unbeknown to us, was that given Lucy's history of adverse reactions to the other 2 vaccines, that she's probably got problems with her immune system. But we won't bother sending her to Newcastle Hospital because it's not serious. Now, our family had private health insurance at the time, but they didn't let us know.
Was that MMR the last vaccine that she had?
No.
Or did she continue to get vaccines?
She didn't have the second MMR vaccine as a young child. Her sister didn't have the MMR vaccines.
Well, she caught measles. You said she caught measles from the vaccine.
Yes. Lucy caught measles from the vaccine. When she was 13 at school and secondary school, she'd had quite reasonable health. She'd had a very good attendance at school, but they introduced a national programme for HPV vaccine in the UK. And we said, with Lucy's history, we couldn't take the advantages of this vaccine because it was too big a risk. But the school nurse caught Mum and said, this vaccine is nothing like the MMR vaccine. This vaccine is safe, and you are denying your daughter a life-saving opportunity. So my wife mistakenly signed a consent form. Cervarix in 2010-2011 was given in 3 doses. 1 in October, 1 in November 2010, and the third one on May the 5th, 2011. After the first and second dose, Lucy had a tough term at school, long school hours, difficult with the weather and the dark nights, and she had flu-like symptoms and very much an aching shoulder, joints in the shoulder. And she went to the doctors a couple of times, but we didn't link it to the HPV vaccine.
How old is she at this point?
She would be 12 at this point. She had the third HPV vaccine at 10:10 in the morning on May the 5th, 2011. In less than 2 hours before lunch, her mum was called to collect her from school because she was unwell. She did go back to school over the next 8 weeks because it was exam time. She was very much into her studies, but she had flu-like symptoms, aching joints, a shoulder, a knee, and sleeping. She couldn't stay awake. She was struggling to stay awake. She'd been to the doctors. They were certain it was glandular fever, but it wasn't glandular fever. After 8 weeks, she collapsed. She couldn't walk. She started to sleep 22, 23 hours a day. We were calling doctors to her 2 or 3 times a week. Midnight on Saturday nights and Sunday nights even. She just could not stay awake. She went to hospital in Carlisle. She was there for 3 days, and the consultant told her there was nothing wrong with her. She was racked in pain. She had violent headaches, all the permanent headaches. Her bones were aching, and she just couldn't stay awake. She was really struggling to eat. I was there when the consultant told her, there's nothing wrong with you, it's all in your head. You need to push yourself. So we went to another hospital for a second opinion. It turned out that the other hospital, the consultant there was actually the boss of the first consultant in the nearby hospital. And she did thorough checks, examinations, x-rays, scans, and couldn't find anything wrong physically. She said she thought it was severe ME, and she was going to contact the NHS lead for paediatric ME, and because that's what she thought it would be. She did actually contact, not telling us, but they said the NHS paediatric lead in the UK that she contacted, and I've got her notes on the medical records, stated to the paediatric consultant, I don't think bed-bound cases of ME are ME. You should have her assessed for pervasive refusal syndrome. I'd never heard of pervasive refusal syndrome. They never told us. They did say they were sending a psychiatric consultant to assess her, because we'd asked, well, she'd been given amitriptyline medication, low dose, in Carlisle Hospital to take away the pain. And it did take away some of the pain. We only found out afterwards that amitriptyline has never been trialled on children. It should only be prescribed for adults, and that one of the side effects in the clinical trials with adults was coma and anorexia. But anyway, they decided to send a psychiatric consultant to see her, to assess her and advise on amitriptyline or an alternative. Spent 2 hours, psychiatric consultant and OT in our house, and we explained everything. They asked if they could go and see Lucy, who was asleep in bed. She'd actually, by this time, she'd gone into what's been described as a 13-week coma-like sleep. She was never fully awake. She never opened her eyes. She couldn't walk. She couldn't talk. She could whisper 1 or 2 words: pain, hurting, mum. But I couldn't hear her because it was such a faint whisper. We would liquidize food and spoon feed her, but she would be semi-conscious. The psychiatric consultant went off on the sick after that. We were visited by an homeopath from London in his own time, and he came to visit Lucy, came on the train. He wasn't able to give her any medication there and then, but he did touch her and say he would try and send some medicine for her and make her better. And she actually woke up on December the 16th, 2011, the day after he'd been. Take one step back, because on November the 22nd, 2011, we used to wake up every couple of hours through the night to check her that she was okay. On November the 22nd, she was stone cold, and I thought she'd died. I had to get her mum to her. Fortunately, one of the problems with the illness is the peripheral coldness, fingers and toes and arms and legs. But her body temperature was okay. We managed to warm her up and revive her. But she woke up the day after the homeopath visited her at home. She still had all of the pain. She still had all of the problems with joints and couldn't walk. She was in a wheelchair. She was sleeping long hours, but at least she was waking up, opening her eyes. She couldn't actually talk until, I think it was about the third week in January 2012. She was making small improvements, but then in March, we noticed that she'd given a sandwich to the dog. We realised that she wasn't eating the food that she should be eating, bearing in mind she'd lost over a third of her body weight during the sleeping period. So she was again referred to the psychiatric consultant, and it didn't go well. They weren't supporting her, they weren't helping her. She was improving. We'd gone to a private clinic, and we'd said that we were thinking of going for 1 week in Tenerife flying. They'd given us a letter to whom it may concern. We think it would be therapeutic. This was in May 2012. Lucy used to like the sunshine and the warmth, so this was going to be hopefully therapeutic. 10 minutes before we were due to leave the house, on the day to come up to Glasgow actually, to fly to Tenerife, the police knocked on the door with a social service person to stop us going. We pleaded with them, we explained all of the situation. The police officer spoke to Countess Moore in the House of Lords. On 3 occasions that afternoon, they agreed that we should be allowed to leave, but they just need to speak to their boss. When they spoke to their boss, we definitely couldn't leave. Eventually, after 4 hours and with support from Countess Moore, we were told by the paediatric consultant, take her to the hospital, have her bloods checked and her physicals checked, and if they were okay, we could leave. So after 4 hours delay, we left and went on holiday. And quite a nice holiday, even though Lucy was in a wheelchair and was sleeping lots of it. We had great difficulty with the help from the NHS, and after a number of months, this is towards the end of 2012, we put in an application for vaccine damage payment, which was rejected, as they always do. But we asked for copies of the evidence that they'd used. And one Saturday morning, this box arrived with 1,000 pages of evidence in it, and it contained also letters saying that we were being investigated for fabricated or induced illness as a family. They hadn't told us. The police were involved, school teachers were involved, even though Lucy missed 5 years of school, but school teachers were involved. Local nurses were involved that had never met her. And eventually, it was 2013 before no fault was found by the police and social services. I obtained minutes of the meetings attended by all of these health professionals and social services, the police and teachers, etc., many that had never met Lucy, and I found 170 inaccuracies, gross inaccuracies, and blatant lies in the minutes. They had tried to frame us for what is also known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. I involved our MP, he involved the chief executive of Cumbria Council, social services and the NHS. It had to go its course. And eventually we found out that there'd been 2 investigations. The first one had been rejected by the police and social services, but the NHS had raised a second one because I had raised a complaint against the consultant who had told lies. And I've got the notes and the records, their own handwriting, where lies were told. It was in their own evidence. But the NHS has never apologised. They've steadfastly refused. But Lucy has suffered with long sleeping. Over time, weeks and months, each day, treated very supportively and carefully, she would improve tiny bit by bit. But then she could have a total relapse, which is, I believe, quite typical of somebody with severe ME. In 2014, she had a relapse, and that year, she never woke herself up once. Throughout 2014, and the first 2 or 3 months of 2015, we would have to wake her 3 times a day to eat and toilet. And it would take us an hour each time to awaken her. And she'd be racked in pain with headaches, her muscles, her joints. Her mum would be tapping her cheek. Lucy afterwards, after being woken, said that felt like it had been slapped, you need to do it more gentle. I would be rubbing her legs because of the muscle problems, cramps. So for about 15 months, she never woke herself up once. But the NHS, all that they would treat her for was anorexia. And even the support for anorexia, she became 18 in January 2016. And adult services should have taken over from paediatric services. There should have been a 6-month handover. We never saw them. We begged for help. We begged the GP for help. We begged for support. She went for some physio in November 2016. Mum had been quite successful at helping her to gain a bit of weight. And the lady there said that she was perhaps carrying a bit too much weight for her joints, which is the worst thing you'd possibly say to somebody who's anorexic. And she just went totally downhill. We couldn't get help. There was a total black hole. We could get no support for her, no counselling. Then we were so desperate that in May, we actually took her to hospital to be tube fed. So after a 9-month black hole, a 9-month gap, adult services turned up at the hospital after a week and sectioned her. And she ended up in hospital for anorexia from May 2016 till February this year. Most of that time was spent 100 miles away, the other side of the country. And although the consultant there was quite nice and agreed to take into consideration the sleeping problems and the pain problems, the nurses, most of them, were absolutely terrible. They made her get up each time. The consultant had said that she could have longer to eat her meals, that she could lie in bed once she had a breakfast. Some of the nurses were terrible. But she stuck at it, she improved, and she was discharged in the first week in February 2017. But 6 years, our family has suffered total hell from the NHS. Virtually no support other than a friendly, nice GP. And we've just totally suffered. I had to give my job up. I went part-time 3 years ago and then took early retirement 2 years ago to help my wife because the caring needed to be 24/7, 365. Today, she is quite a bit better, but she's still struggling. She's still got problems.
How old is she?
She's now 19. But her life has been hell. She's been totally socially deprived. She's been in a darkened room, in a bedroom for most of the last 6 years. Eventually, they treated her very badly in the first month in the clinic in 2016. But eventually she pulled through and managed to follow their strict regime for gaining weight. And she has benefited. And eventually we did manage to have a working relationship with the nurses as well as the consultant. But it was very, very tough. And Lucy is still extremely delicate.
It was a tragic story. I'm so angry with that nurse that told you that vaccine was safe. That she went out
Not as angry as my wife and myself and Lucy.
I know, it's just, this is the same.
Even today, GPs in the UK, last week, there was a report from GPs magazine that 94% of GPs in the UK are supportive of HPV vaccine being given to boys, and they would give it to their sons. How can they possibly give informed consent to anybody if they haven't got a clue what they're advising? The same is happening in Ireland. In the last couple of days there's been a report in Ireland. The Minister of Health there and a senior doctor, they're telling the GPs to push very, very hard. In fact, there's a report, I think it's today, one of the Irish newspapers, where one of the GPs is saying they should cut their benefits of children, family benefits for those that aren't vaccinated. This has already happened in Australia. It's already been happening, I think, in some states in the United States. But the families are saying, we've had to give up our job to care for our child. These aren't, it's not in their head, this is physical. This is, lots of them have had seizures. Our daughter had only one seizure, fortunately, when she was in the clinic. But girls are dying.
I know.
I got involved with a number of families and met Frida Birrell, and together we formed, a small group of us, formed the UK Association of HPV Vaccine Injured Daughters. We've now got 434 members, I think.
So say again, what's it called?
It's AHVID, HAVID. It stands for Association of HPV Vaccine Injured Daughters. We did a questionnaire 2 years ago, and we got 94 responses. I've got over 100 responses now, and I think it was 76% of the families had been told it was all in their daughter's head. It's supposed to raise a yellow card. It's similar to VAERS in the United States. If there's a suspect adverse reaction to a drug or a vaccine, and of the 94 members that had responded, they'd been seen by a total of over 900 doctors, and obviously over 90 school nurses, and only 13 had suggested that a yellow card be raised. So almost 1,000 health professionals had refused, well, some had actually refused. They'd said, no, I'm not going to raise one. Yet it is supposed to be for a suspect adverse reaction. The MHRA, I've done lots of research, freedom of information requests here in the UK. The MHRA, which is the government body, independent body supported by Big Pharma, they collect the yellow cards. The yellow cards were actually introduced around the world probably as a reporting system, adverse reaction reporting system, after the thalidomide scandal, where many children were severely malformed and died. Introduced a system, but they're ignoring it. They're burying their heads in the sand. They tell you publicly, they told the JCVI, which is the body that recommends to the government the use of a vaccine or not, they told them they are not aware of any serious adverse reactions. I have got drug analysis prints from the same MHRA which says that there have been 22,000 adverse reactions in 9,500 cards, including 6 fatalities. I've even found access to the World Health Organization that recommend this vaccine. They have a database of adverse drug reactions at www.vigiaccess.org, where there are 267,000 adverse reactions reported in 77,800 reports, including 280 deaths. That information was on the Cape Argus front page headlines with my name against it this morning. I've battled. I've been to the government in Edinburgh, Scottish government. I've been to Westminster twice each place. It's like banging your head against a brick wall. I know that the MHRA, the Department of Health in the UK, they denied that GlaxoSmithKline's Pandemrix flu vaccine caused narcolepsy. It was only when they introduced it in Norway, Finland and Sweden in schools that they realised they got 1,000 cases in Europe, and it's only retrospectively that the UK accepted that it was causing narcolepsy. And children, they made it difficult for children that have I think there's 100 cases in the UK that they're trying to settle out of court and keep it out of the public eye. But it's almost certainly a similar adjuvant, ASO3 in the Pandemrix, ASO4 in the HPV, with aluminium.
People are just so sorry, that you guys, because we all know with vaccine injury how it destroys the whole family, and we just. Now, there's some people here that want to be able to get in contact with you.
Mm-hmm.
Would Facebook be a good place for them to contact you?
They can do, but I freely give out I search the web. I don't use the web for information. I use the web to communicate. The information, the facts that I get from freedom of information, from the manufacturers.
Hang on, while you're talking, you can
And
see how much they love you at the same time. Look, because they're all coming in. So see all those hearts.
Yeah.
Right, keep telling them.
Talk
to them.
The Irish newspapers over the last couple of days, it's been very evident in there that the government, the health minister and the senior doctors, health departments are saying that there's no faults with this vaccine is safe. I keep putting the facts. I put the facts that I get from the manufacturers through freedom of information and from the World Health Organization. I do perhaps add that out of the 94 questionnaires that we received, there were 27 of them which had a reaction to the vaccine within minutes or hours. Some of them had multiple adverse reactions. Because there were 3 doses, they had a mild reaction to the first. Some had a very severe adverse reaction to the first dose and went to hospital immediately. Some of them had a mild reaction to the first dose but told it wasn't an adverse reaction to the vaccine. They had a more severe reaction to the second dose and was told by all the health professionals nothing to do with the vaccine. By the time of the third vaccine, they were seriously disabled. And all of these happened within less than 27% of them happened in less than 24 hours of being vaccinated. But they say it's a coincidence. There's no evidence. The MHRA, I'll step to the EMA, the European Medicines Association, were pushed by Europe to do a safety review in 2015. They were pushed by Denmark because of POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is quite similar to chronic fatigue and ME, or has many of the same symptoms, and by Japan, who were complaining bitterly about chronic regional pain syndrome, CRPS. But they did the review only on those 2 symptoms, and they used one piece of evidence as their holy grail of evidence that these vaccines were nothing to do with chronic fatigue, POTS and CRPS. The evidence was authored by MHRA doctors, their own employees. It used a system which can be used for vaccines, whereby after vaccination you monitor the patient's diagnoses with doctors and yellow cards. But of course the doctors weren't raising yellow cards. It's only after our association raised the importance of this that the families have raised some of the yellow cards themselves or insisted their doctors raise the yellow cards. But they also used a system whereby if you have an adverse reaction within 6 months, within 12 months of the vaccine, they say it could be part of the vaccine. But if the diagnosis is after 12 months, it must have been natural. Now that, if you've got measles, mumps or rubella virus in the vaccine, is almost certainly true. But when you've got an aluminium adjuvant that's causing neurological problems, the problem is that in the UK, the Department of Health specified that you can't even diagnose, a doctor can't diagnose it within 3 months. There isn't a check for it. It can't be positive. You have to eliminate everything else first. We found that the patients that were eventually being diagnosed with chronic fatigue, CRPS and POTS, it was taking an average of 3.5 years to get a diagnosis. Some cases it was 6 or 7 years before they had a diagnosis. But the system they'd used to prove, in their eyes, that the vaccine is safe was they said that the reports within 12 months of vaccination could be because of vaccination. The ones afterwards must be naturally occurring. And yet it was taking an average of 3.5 years to get a diagnosis. Their methodology was corrupt. They used false information, they used false evidence, they made false assumptions. Now, I have supplied all of this information on behalf of AVID to the European HPV vaccine was introduced in Scotland, that there's been a reduction of 95% in the HPV viruses in the girls that have been vaccinated. Now, that might be true, but they've forgotten that there's more than 170 HPV viruses. The two in the Cervarix vaccine is types 16 and 18. There are 4 types in Gardasil. There's very little Gardasil 9 used in the UK, but 9 types in Gardasil 9. There are scientists around the world that believe create a vacuum in nature and it will be filled by other viruses of the HPV strains that could be more lethal. I obtained copies from the Scottish Government's own statistical department, ISD, from their website, which shows that in 2012, 2013, 2014, the number of cervical cancer cases amongst 20 to 24-year-olds is 4 times greater than what it was when the vaccine was introduced. And yet there's been a reduction of 95% in the HPV vaccines, HPV viruses, according to their scientists. So they've obviously been replaced or missed, or something else is happening by other HPV types. But their own statistics tell you that there have been 4 times more in the 20 to 24-year-olds. Now, the 20 to 24-year-olds, Scotland introduced the vaccine in 2008. In 2008-2009, they had a catch-up programme for girls up to 18. And they claim 90% success rate. In fact, I'm not sure whether Scotland or England, it should have been a 3-year catch-up programme, but they achieved it within 2 years. So all of those girls that were 18, 16, 17 and 18, in 2008-2010, they should now be in the 20 to 24-year age group. In fact, there's similar results in England. The ONS government statistics are showing not a 4 times increase, but they're showing an increase in cervical cancer cases in England in the 20 to 24-year age group. And they achieved the programme of catch-up within 2 years, when it was intended to be 3 years, and they provided the vaccine to 18-year-olds in 2008-2009. So cases of cervical cancer are increasing.
Right, so how can they, thank you, your wealth of knowledge, I can't hold this camera up for a second, hang on, just put it like that. Your wealth of knowledge, we're extremely grateful. How can they contact you, and do you have a website for AVID? Arvid?
We don't have a website, we have Facebook pages.
Okay, so they go to, spell it again?
AHVID.
So AHVID. Go there on Facebook, and how do they contact you? Through that?
Yeah.
Okay.
There are the other association that we have links with, that they can always get in touch with us, is SaneVax in the United States.
Yeah, we love SaneVax.
Yeah.
So they know about that. Yours is a good one. In fact, all of these organisations, all of our organisations should be joining together.
Absolutely. We are very, very close to SaneVax. Frida was working for SaneVax, our chair, before we formed this association. But between us, we both give a huge amount of support to SaneVax. But we have a network around the world. We're often in contact. As I said, this morning my name was on headlines in South Africa, contesting the advice that they've been given by the health officials there that these vaccines are safe and effective. HPV vaccine is neither safe nor effective.